This is it, Science Sunday. Welcome, everyone. We have a nice group in the sanctuary here, and we're talking about the magic wand experiment idea concepts. Wanted to thank the generous spirit and like-minded attitude of the DuPage UU Church, and also the Prairie State Humanists who participate in all this with the president, Scott Thompson here.
Grand Poobah I am.
Yeah, the Grand Poobah, yeah. We thank the DUUC Church who provides us with this physical space and also the supportive structure to hold these science-minded forums. So thanks so much for coming here and at home, and you're welcome. We do this the first and third Sundays of the month through the church calendar and try to talk about interesting topics in science. And we strive to uphold the principles that this church is based on. There's 7 UU principles, but mainly the most directly ones, Principle 4, which is the free and responsible search for truth and meaning, is an important aspect for us. And also Principle 7, respect for the interdependent web of existence, of which we are obviously a part. We're planning later on in the year for a discussion with the DUUC minister, Mandy Huizinga.
Hang on, are you having trouble hearing? Can we have the volume up in the sanctuary a little bit?
So we're planning a discussion with the DUUC minister, Mandy Huizinga, in April concerning awe and wonder in science. Is that a little bit heavy, or is that okay? Sounds all right? Okay. I would be remiss, and we've had a few talks about this and made some hints and things about it, but I wanted to bring it up before we get into our discussion today about some maybe clouds on the horizon about Science Sunday, and as I see it at least. First, under this format of kind of relatively open in-person meetings that we're having, meaning masks are voted on prior to the start of taping, and we did that today, and we all decided we were spread out enough and fine that we didn't see needs for a mask. But we really feel the sting, I'd say, of low attendance. We're having people in here, and it's so wonderful to see people, but we kind of remember the heady days when Science Sunday was going pre-COVID, in which we'd have 60, 70 people, and then nice discussions and interactions and chats back and forth at the end of the time. And I miss a lot of the people that were regulars here and that came in and made it a part of their day.
It was a social forum.
It really was, yeah. So we really do hope for better turnout. Really, I'm doing some things today that are asking for responses, and you're welcome to respond back on the YouTube channel, and we will monitor that and respond, so please do that. But we're also looking for the interaction that goes on here. I'm not a professional scientist. I've loved science and studied it and so on, but if you really want to learn more about science, and especially if you're sitting at home, I'd recommend hearing Richard Attenborough or Brian Cox or Neil deGrasse Tyson, Carl Sagan.
Some of our inspirations that are,
they
have made
very
their
well when
living.
I taught them when they were young.
Right.
Yeah. Who? Oh, Scott Thompson and his book, yeah, and so on, and Mike Albrow and so on too. Can you, if you want to say something, will you grab the microphone?
That way,
Great.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'd like to. So the real value, in my opinion, of these presentations, beyond the spreading of scientific thought, maybe aimed at like a non-science professional group, a lay group of people. Is the interaction and discussion and humor and joshing around and good fellowship that really this 12-year-long project has always endeavored to provide. So, Mike?
So first a question. Do you have a plan for rebuilding the in-person meetings that we used to have?
Begging is, basically where we're at right now. Begging is pretty important. If I could wave a magic wand and make it happen, that'd be good too. But no, we do have some ideas, and.
I mean, I talked to you last week, Mike, about this, and need to think about one suggestion is to try not having
the online.
Meetings.
Yeah.
Say you've got to come to these meetings.
Right.
Participate in it, because it's a huge difference when you have interaction in person than when you're sitting at home on a screen, right?
Right.
So I think we might try that even as an experiment for a few months.
Well, that's
or
the way
so.
it used to be, Mike. You know,
Exactly how it used
Mike
to be.
Albro is speaking. So
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think it would help to go back to that, to say people, you like these talks, meetings, come in person.
Yeah.
And
It limits some things too, in my mind, and, for example, I could show a whole TED Talk if I wanted to before we presented this on YouTube. But now that we're streaming, YouTube has its restrictions and doesn't want to do it. So if I thought something was being said in a way in 5 or 10 minutes that really helped me push a point on by someone more engaged in that whole process than I was, it was fine to turn it on and have somebody, have the whole group see that and use that as part of our discussion. But now YouTube will shut us down if we try to, grab some other people's content.
let YouTube shut us down. That's fine.
Yeah.
In my opinion, that's
Yeah.
fine.
No, that's a
Because
good
as
point.
you say, I mean, as you say, if I'm at home on the screen, I can look at, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Brian Cox, or Carl Sagan, and that's bigger. That's But the great thing about
I've always
these
loved
is
you, though.
interactions,
Right.
questions. You can
Right.
say silly things and so on if you want to, without being afraid to put something in the chat or Q&A on Zoom. And again, that's my view.
Thank you, yeah. No, I think that's very true. So this kind of interaction that we're talking about doesn't really happen as well when you have 5 people in the audience. It would be even more disappointing if we didn't have really fairly successful viewership at home. Like I said, last month's presentation by Scott had about 5 people, 6 people in the audience, but I looked at it this morning, had 79 views online. And we're imagining, some people, the Wunderlics, watch it together, so 2 people are seeing it there. We might be having as many people as we used to have regularly in the old Science Sundays, but they're just doing it in a different way. Then there's a question, is just everything changed because of COVID and because of the restrictions and so on? Are people learning different ways? Are less people coming into a church service when they can see it at home? And so, like I say, if you want to add to your scientific knowledge, we love that you come here and talk with us about it. We love that you watch us online, but there are more polished and professional sites, than on the web. And like Mike was already kind of stealing my thunder, it has been suggested that we maybe stop streaming our twice-a-month talks to address both these issues. So it would also, if you really want to be involved and be a part of this, part of it is that communication and interaction, I feel.
Yeah, we used to have people that would volunteer to give guest lectures, guest talks, and demonstrations. Some of them are in this room, several of them, in fact. And we love that. We love the participation and the various experiences and curiosities that all of you have. Mike and I are endlessly curious about the way the universe works, and we try to dredge up interesting topics for you as well. But this is your forum. This is a church forum to discuss the search for truth and meaning, and especially those truths that derive from a systematic investigation of nature. That's where science comes from, and that's, Mike and I are both lovers of knowledge. We like to know how the world works, how things are put together, why things break down, everything from consciousness to atoms to stars to natural selection. Our curiosities range the gamut. And I think yours do too. And we'd love you to bring your curiosity in person to enrich our discussion and exploration.
I guess I want to finish this portion of it by just saying I kind of question our purpose. I don't know that I know what our purpose is if people aren't showing up,
Yeah.
right? If it's just viewed that way and people are saying, well, I've gotten enough fix and it's kind of nice to see Mike and Scott jabber around and kid each other and talk a bit about something, and they usually pick an interesting topic or whatever, but that maybe isn't enough purpose for me, right? I want the interaction of people coming up later and saying, this is what it meant to me, what you said this way, or this is where you had it completely wrong, Mike. There's a whole other theory about this. It's much more.
The community experience is
Yeah.
really important to us.
Yeah. So anyways, that's, like I said, I wanted to end it with saying, I think I'm questioning what our purpose is. if few people are actually showing up. You know, the church, maybe it's going to be opening up. They're talking about more and more ways to get people in the church, and I think Science Sunday has shown itself as a wonderful way to get people in the church.
What other church talks about science?
Right.
Right? This is a wonderful opportunity to come to a place with people who are searching for answers, searching for a sense of place and meaning and history, and we happen to think that science provides the best answers to those kinds of searches. And we think that there's a lot of you that feel similarly. So we recognize that there are people who are passionate about the systematic investigation of some of the mysteries of the cosmos. We just hope that you show up and participate rather than just being consumers of our information.
All right, great. We'll stop haranguing everyone about it.
All right.
All right. So thanks again for showing up. We really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun to get together, and the best topics are things we can talk and laugh about after we're done speaking here too. So thanks again for coming. I wanted to talk about magic wand experiments. I heard a few things talking about that, and it's interesting because magic wands sometimes don't get talked about enough. Right?
Yeah, they don't get their due, really.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So I brought some magic wands, and if you have something that you want to wave around and make some magic happen in here later, I will lend you a magic wand. It may have some limitations or it may not. Depends on how I feel, actually, because it's my magic wand. So, well, Homer tried to explain how magic wands worked in the first place, but we'll talk about that. The ancient Greek poet Homer invented the magic wand. You may be interested to know. In the Iliad and the Odyssey, the god Hermes used a magic wand to make people sleep. I won't do that now.
Oh, that's too bad. Don't point it at the audience.
Right. Athena used it to make Odysseus old for a while and then young again. Athena made him old and young to put him through some paces. Circe used it to turn Odysseus' whole crew into pigs. And I won't do that either.
Thank you.
You're welcome. But then after that, not really so much magic wand stuff for quite a few thousand years. But here at Science Sunday, we're bringing the magic wand back. We want to support the greatest of all hidden pleasures, nerdy experiments. I'm a big fan of nerdy experiments, and so we're going to use the magic wand today to talk about that. All right? But if we want to look at experiments and talk about things, magic wand experiments is something that maybe you haven't heard about so much, but I thought we'd kind of categorize what other kinds of experiments people are used to. You may have some other suggestions. I broke it up into three. There's natural experiments in which you find and evaluate occurrences that are out there in the world. Maybe there's a whole bunch of data out there. You're not setting up all these different things to test stuff. You're just looking at occurrences that are out there in the world, and then you're trying to come up with reasons for why that is. So you can have all the data given to you. Sometimes the U.S. Census Bureau can give you all sorts of data, and then you use that data and come up with some kind of development of thought, explanation for what it's there. Maybe the large occurrences of COVID in certain regions of the country or in certain regions of the world. And that all that data is there, and then you try to find out why or try to experiment with it a little bit.
You turn correlation into causation.
Yeah.
Right? You find things that seem to be correlated in geography or phenomena or cultures or languages. You try to slice observations up in many different ways, and then you end up with correlations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a causal link between them. So that's part of the fun of science, is winnowing out the causal relationships from coincidental.
Right, yeah. So those are one kind. Thought experiments are another one too, something that you can't really observe very easily or can't see, but you can go through thought experiments and maybe develop what maybe extrapolate that onto other things. If you see global warming is a there's data supporting ideas about global warming, and then you might want to say, well, what does that mean to the pine bark beetles in Canada? And then you can not really have to do an experiment, but you can talk about what goes on with them and how they maybe will have, instead of one reproductive cycle every year, now they'll have 2 reproductive cycles a year. And if that happens, what's going to go on from that? So you can go through all sorts of different thought experiments that develop things. Probably there's thought experiments all the time, Mike Albrow would tell us, going on at Fermilab, or at, and maybe they're not doing as many times around the track, with the electrons and so on, but they're doing thought experiments to try to develop where could the Higgs boson possibly be, or what's the next big thing coming up there.
Well, the Higgs boson started off as a thought experiment. Somebody said, well, it makes sense that there is this critter out there in the universe.
Right.
And it was an imaginary or an imagined thing long before it was a measured thing.
Not that there wasn't data backing up
Oh,
or
sure,
giving you
yeah.
suppositions to work from or so on, but there were things to develop and work through in your mind, right?
Yeah.
And the third kind I came up with are formal experiments, in which you have a theory, you develop a hypothesis that explains the theory, you set up tests to try to do that, the laboratory kinds of things, or whatever your laboratory is defined to be, in a school or out in the world somewhere, or in an actual laboratory in which you're doing things in that case. Carrie?
Just as a point, there's also something called a quasi-experiment, which I mentioned. You mentioned schools. When you can't actually randomize your groups like in schools, it's called a quasi-experiment.
A quasi-experiment, Carrie's saying, in which you can't really randomize, you can't set up all the scientific controls that you may want to do. And maybe that's something that we'll talk about even more today. Maybe it's a magic wand type of experiment too. It has its capacities, but it's maybe understanding its limitations too. It can't randomize everything, and I'll be talking about some of those in the next bit too. So, these are different broad types of experiments that are available, and each have their strengths and weaknesses. Maybe you get great data, great understandings if you set up a whole laboratory experiment, but maybe it doesn't really tell you everything about what's out there in the real world. Or maybe things that happen out in the real world aren't controlled enough for you to be able to tell specifically that this is the cause of something as well too. So every experiment, I would imagine, has its weaknesses and strengths and tells you things and doesn't tell you other things. And you have to have the capacity to visualize it and say, this tells me quite a bit, but maybe it doesn't tell me everything I'd like to know. So you move on from that. Okay. So we wonder, what if you could design an experiment that would have no financial, no logistical, no practical, or maybe even no moral constraints? Okay. Wow. An experiment that answers a question that could otherwise never be answered. It may be so far-fetched. It could be so fantastical. It could be so offensive that you don't usually even admit that you want to do it. Unless Mike and Scott come together and hand you a magic wand and say, oh, come on, do it. Those are what I'm calling magic wand experiments. Things that probably can't be done. Many of them almost definitely can't be done. But they're pretty fun to think about and pretty interesting to experiment where science actually has its limits, what you can't completely fully do based on all these different constraints, moral, ethical, logistic, financial boundaries, all right? So this lets our mind go free. Scott and Mike are saying, go ahead, okay? How many times maybe have you gotten into a discussion with some expert smarty pants person, and after a long discussion they say, of course we really don't know, whatever. Or we may never know, whatever. It's unknowable, they may say, right? This is unknowable. Why is it unknowable? What would you like to know about but really need to push a few boundaries to be certain of? here's where I let you. You're going to be able to do that right now. Strap in. This ride might get a little bumpy. Scott, you got any magic wand experiments that jump to mind with you?
Well, I happen to love astrophysics, and
Oh, wait, here.
one of the things that I would love to have is some kind of platform from which to conduct observations and experiments around collapsars, black holes, neutron stars, white dwarfs. So if time and space and money and material were no object, I would like to build a space collapsar observation telescope, a SCOT, and see what we could figure out from that.
Ah, okay.
Now, whoosh, hocus pocus.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what would this thing, would it be having, like radar waves or all?
Everything, all the electromagnetic spectrum, gravitational waves, maybe some impactile or impactor, kinetic impactors. You know, you throw a cannonball at a neutron star and see what happens to it. Maybe throw a flashlight down a black hole and see what happens to the flashlight as it disappears over the horizon.
Not just a flashlight, but the light emanating from it too.
Right, yeah. And a flashing light.
Uh-huh.
You know, right? There are
A
all
strobe.
kinds of things. Yeah, strobe. So all kinds of things. You could let a strobe down on a wire and see what happens, you know. There's just any number of things you could do if you were somehow proximal to one of these things. Probably not a manned station, though. These things tend to give off a lot of gamma rays and X-rays and other kinds of inclement radiation. But I think that, I've got a whole list here, but that's number one on my list.
That sounds pretty neat. All right, let's see. Anyone out there want to talk about a, Mike?
Oh, Mike's going to pass around the mic to Mike.
Mike to Mike to Mike.
Well, of course, I have many, but one that would be is in the category is that now we know that neutrinos have mass. Therefore, they don't travel exactly the speed of light, but they travel very, very close to the speed of light.
Okay.
And the question is, if you could then overtake a neutrino by going faster than the neutrino itself, does it become an antineutrino, or what does it do? Because neutrinos all have a certain helicity, that is, they've got an angular momentum pointing in their direction. Antineutrinos, it's in the other direction. So it's a genuine question now. People are saying, do neutrinos become antineutrinos, or do they disappear, or what happens if you could overtake one?
Go 1% faster than a neutrino and see how their helicity changes.
See how their helicity changes. Now, although nobody ever thinks it's possible at all to ever overtake a neutrino, but there are experiments that are
possible.
trying to tell this, and one is called, and there's a lot of people looking for a neutrino-less double beta decay.
A
Where
neutrino what?
double beta decay, where
Neutrino-less.
a nucleus changes its charge without emitting neutrinos, and that would be a sign that actually neutrinos are the same as the antineutrinos. And
So you'd like to make that experiment happen immediately?
well, those experiments are happening, but what I would really like to do is to be able to overtake a neutrino, given
Right.
the limits. And I mean, of course, if you reduce the energy of the neutrino, then it's going slower, and you can, in principle, try and
Right.
overtake it. But it's never going to happen, not in our grandkids' lifetime.
So you get the capacity to observe this neutrino by going at that speed? Yeah.
Right.
I was
Joanne.
thinking of another one, the marvel of the human brain. We have marvelous chemistry. We can understand the chemistry, we can understand the physics and everything else. But where is the thought? How does thought and consciousness fit into chemistry? That would be an experiment that I would love to be able to do, and I can't even begin to formulate.
You want to cut into a thinking brain and slice it up little by little to see what's
Well,
going on?
that defeats the purpose, doesn't it?
Well, as long as the brain's still alive, you can get something out of it.
You have a magic wand, remember?
So we need a probe of some kind.
Yeah.
So, but we've got probes that we can dig in, and we can stimulate portions of the brain which then cause a thought to occur. or cause a feeling to occur or cause a sensation. We know how to do that. We can actually turn the brain on and off. That is, we know where the center of consciousness is, and by kicking with an electronic probe, we can shut you down.
Or chemicals with anesthetizing.
Oh,
right?
we
Yeah.
know about chemicals. Oh, anyway.
But I wanted to be more specific. Is there something that you want to be doing to that brain? Would it be in a human? Would it be in a dog? Would it be, in a dolphin, or what
I
would you,
think
or
that's
all
one
of
of
the
the
above?
problems. I think it's one of the problems that I'm facing. I don't know how to formulate the question well.
But you want to know more about it.
Yeah, I want to know how chemistry becomes thinking.
And could you restrict some chemicals and see what occurs to the brain then? That wouldn't be ethical, but you have a magic
we
wand.
do that all the time. Everything from magic mushrooms to aspirin, So we
I mean more
we understand
significantly.
that part, and we can see the effect. But what is consciousness in terms of chemistry? What is a thought in terms of chemistry? When I'm speaking to you right now, my brain is formulating thoughts. It turns it into a language. I now enunciate. We know the mechanics of it. How do I actually make a thought occur inside of the chemistry of my brain? And I know the chemistry is occurring. I know the electronics is occurring. But what is it that makes it a thought?
But this is where this can be very valuable, because you tell me what you want to learn, what you want to understand, but we have to come up, an important aspect I'd like to push you on is, how do you do that? How do you gain?
No idea.
Well, I'd like to follow that up with perhaps something that's a bit simpler than trying to understand consciousness in terms of science. But here's a big issue for the 21st century, which we're in, about memory. I can remember nursery rhymes from when I was 2 or 3 years old. They're still there somehow. How are they stored? How does memory work? This is the thing. Now, this is something, I mean, you can, in principle, and maybe we will, figure out that, such memory is readable, is localized or not localized, like a hologram or something. Still, consciousness is another issue altogether. And my own belief, which is faith, is that consciousness is not something that is within a domain of science. It cannot be quantified and measured accurately.
Fascinating.
It's something on the other side. So science is one domain, if you like, of culture. But on the other side, we have things that are not science and probably never will be, in my opinion. Consciousness, feelings, emotions, love, hate, those things. I mean, you may figure out that when you're in love, certain chemicals happen in your body, hormones, whatever. That doesn't mean you understand consciousness. I think it's something that is maybe outside the domain of music, art.
In this kind of view, it's kind of a dualism, right? So consciousness exists outside of the body, or separate from the action of the brain. So you could probably do experiment. In principle, you could do experiments to validate that.
I think what Mike's talking about is tacit knowledge, which is the chronic problem of learning anything about art or music, or any of the arts, and a lot of the things that you just talked about. And there's a lot of resistance to studying tacit knowledge, because tacit knowledge is knowledge that cannot be put into words. And it doesn't, my personal feeling, having studied it for many, many years, is that potentially it could be quantifiable, it could be scientific, but there's so much resistance to using coding systems that are not linguistic or numerical, that there hasn't been enough work done on it.
So what kind of work would you do if you could do an experiment?
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to get
Yeah.
to. So what we really need is an experiment to help us make the direct transfer from brain to knowledge through vision, for example, or through music or whatever. But my area is vision, and like you, I can't completely envision that yet, because I also have the limitations of language always imposing on me. But I can tell you that I can tell when, for example, a student's work of art is better than another student's work of art, even if I can't put it into words. And that's tacit knowledge that I've learned over decades of looking at student art. No, but I can say that there is more of this color than that color, and it's balanced in this particular way, and quantify that. I've done it many times. So, yeah, but there's still this tacit knowledge problem that can't be, that, as you say, so far has not been quantified and put into language. We teach, maybe not, but it's possible, because we teach artistic style, let's say. Okay, so let's say if I wanted you to learn what Impressionism was, okay?
If you want to
I
what,
could-
I'm sorry.
Let's say I was trying to teach Mike what Impressionism is, the style Impressionism. I could talk to you all day long about the verbal characteristics that can be coded for Impressionism, even the numerical ones, like, you know, in pointillism, for example, that can be broken down numerically very easily. But you'll never really understand it until I show you 5 pictures that are impressionistic.
Machine learning could do this, maybe.
Yeah, could be AI, actually, that could help with it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And actually, I think long live the difference between feelings and science. And for example, you know, you go to a concert, see Beethoven's symphony or something like that, and the conductor, and it all conveys emotions and feelings to people. Not quantifiable, and long live the non-quantifiability of it. And
Just to clarify, feelings is not tacit knowledge, it's not the same. They're related, of course.
Say that again?
Thank you. Just to clarify what I was saying, feelings and tacit knowledge are not the same thing. Tacit knowledge is knowledge. Feelings are connected to knowledge, of course, but it's not the same thing.
I agree. Okay, knowledge, yes. So the knowledge, I mean, the conductor knows, he knows all the notes of the symphony. That's knowledge, but it's not science. Science doesn't cover all knowledge. There's knowledge that is not scientific, including impressionism and so on. You learn how to recognize different styles of art, but that's not science, and it doesn't need to be science. Science doesn't have to cover everything like that, and maybe it never will.
Well, one last thing, and then maybe we'll move on.
Okay, yeah, and because these are magic wand experiments, you know, I'll just say fine, but I'm not actually convinced that we won't be able to get, I'm using a double negative here, that we won't be able to get more scientific information about how tacit knowledge works. Maybe not feelings, but tacit knowledge.
So, interesting stuff. So why do we do experiments? Sometimes to find out answers for ourselves, but sometimes you're doing experiments that are maybe spreading the truth that you feel you already know, or giving the ideas that you feel like you know already to give you data or some level of chops to be able to tell people and persuade other people of whatever truth that you think you have. You may feel very strongly that, for example, screen time is really bad for young kids, right? They should not be looking at phones, they should not be on computers, but you might do an experiment to try to prove that that's what you feel about it, that that's your thought about those things. Might be an interesting magic wand experiment. What if you'd randomly assign, kids are born, and I'm trying to bring it back to more experiments because it is hard to quantify some of these challenges and things that you have, but what if kids, when they were born, someone randomly walked around and put a sticker on every kid that was born, a green sticker, an orange sticker, a red sticker, and that would arbitrarily, randomly assign that child to an amount of screen time that they would be allowed for the next 10 years of their life. Okay? That's a magic wand. I don't think that would be allowed. I can't see how that would be done. Mm-hmm. But I bet there's a lot of people here that would like to try it, right? They would like to do it. And maybe you've done it with your family in some ways too. You've arbitrarily assigned at least part of it. But it hasn't been an experiment, right? You're just imposing your thoughts and your ideas on others. So if you could do that and you'd have 1,000 kids that were randomly assigned to different amounts of screen time, right, through their formative years, you could tend to see what happens.
Track their social or emotional IQ, track their reading of books and,
Their interaction, like you say, the social IQ, how well
Yeah.
you interact with other people, how many people become axe murderers,
right? How much time they spend outdoors?
Right.
Climbing trees?
Right, right. So that's one level of pretty interesting thing. And so we perform magic wand experiments really to help us think about the things in the world that we want to know, but really aren't allowed to find out. Magic wands and their power should make you feel a little uncomfortable. I'd be a little uncomfortable having kids arbitrarily assigned to different amounts of social interaction with, or interaction with a computer. But I'd like to know about it.
Yeah.
Be fun. Since these are my magic wands here and my Science Sunday, these wands, I would say what I'd like to do is kind of focus on magic wands and magic wand experiments that are maybe only useful to study things in our world, let's say, here on Earth, things that affect us as humans, right?
You're going
And-
to take away my space orbital platform there?
No, I'm giving you that. You got that one,
Okay,
and
all
now
right,
I'm
good.
taking it away.
All right.
Okay, you had it, and you can keep running that experiment. But things that affect us humans or our environment. And maybe it'll become apparent why I'm trying to limit it that way. But that's my magic wand, and that's how it works. But if we do that, and if we talk about these interactions of humans and the environment and our world, you know, I mean, we can look at how our Earth interacts with the sun or something like that. That has to do with humans and the environment too. But I can pretty much assure you that maybe some of this will make us feel a little uncomfortable if we limit it to humans in the world, and that's not a bad thing either. I'm happy to have that little bit of uncomfort settle in with us a little bit too, and for the next 25 minutes or so, and that'll be just fine. So that's one experiment, or one thought about it, about let a social experiment go in terms of how much screen time each child randomly gets to have. And I think that there's some real benefits that you'd learn if you'd be able to run it, and just as a magic wand experiment, it's interesting to think about. Another one comes up with, if other people have other experiments that you want to talk about right now, I'm happy to give some time at any time we want to. But another one that's interesting are a lot of the twin tests. Have you heard about different tests they want to do with twins, and they've done with twins? But you're still limited, right, when you have twins. Have you heard about the two sets of twins that were born in Bogota, Colombia? About in 1990s or so. So they're about 30 now. Two sets of identical twins were born in Bogota, Colombia, and two sets of twins were born actually the next day in a little farming community near La Paz, about 110 miles north of there. And one of the kids was experiencing some, from the La Paz community, was experiencing a little bit of disease, lack of health. They brought the kids, both kids, back to, or they brought the one kid, I believe, back to Bogota. And they were in the hospital together, and sure as would happen, they got transferred. They got mixed up. And they didn't know the kids yet well enough, or they hadn't done enough tests at that time, and they sent these kids home.
So one child from each set of twins went to two different homes.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And they assumed that they were fraternal twins because they did more testing and they saw that they were different. So they were raised as fraternal twins for over 25 years. One had the benefits, one family had the benefits of an urban environment and social milieu that was in Bogota, Colombia, and the other was on a farm that it took them 45 minutes to walk down the road, even to go to school, down a muddy road. They actually got a 5th grade education and then stopped and went home and learned, did things to help out the family. And so you have these twins that are in two separate environments growing up. Pretty neat magic wand experiment. think I have some pictures of them here, yeah. So they were raised as fraternal twins, although they were identical twin to another child 110 miles away. The two that were in the farm near La Paz, William and Wilbur, went through fifth grade of schooling. They did some mandatory military service, and they ended up, one of them ended up being a butcher, and after that, in about their late 20s, he moved to Bogota. Well, there he is working in a butcher shop in Bogota, and people are coming in saying, "Carlos, how are you?" He said, "Well, my name's not Carlos." "Well, you look exactly like Carlos." "Well, no, I grew up in La Paz and everything," and they did the work. They looked at their data about them. They said, "Well, here's my friend Carlos," and it did look just like him, right? And it had somebody standing right next to Carlos that looked just like Wilbur's brother. So in fairly short order, they figured out what was going on, and it was a transfer of kids at the hospital. That was a mistake being made at the hospital, and these kids...
It's like a Disney movie.
Yeah. The social scientists went nuts
Yeah.
with this, right? What can we do with this? Where are these kids alike? How are they different? What happened to the one boy who was born in La Paz but was raised, in a culturally rich society in Bogota? What happened to the kid in Bogota that was born in Bogota but was raised in a culturally deprived farmland in La Paz and so on? And they did all sorts of studies and everything that went on with this kind of thing. And but you can only take it so far if you don't have a magic wand. What could you do if you had a magic wand and with an experiment similar to this? Mike, you have some ideas?
Well, I was just going to comment. And at the beginning, you said, suppose you had no limitation on resources and forget about ethics. Now, remember, you're in a Unitarian church. You can't do high statistics experiments like this. It's very unethical to separate twins or to label kids at birth with one or another future. That's not ethical. So I think that should not be, obviously you can't do such a thing with high statistics to see what happens. It's interesting observations.
You would learn a lot if you do it, but it's unethical.
Yeah, so, and we're in a Unitarian church, so I think we shouldn't propose unethical experiments.
But still, we have an example. What tests did they perform? What did they do? Are they intellectually similar? Do they have similar ideas and similar outputs? Given their own devices, do they dress the same? Do they perform the same? I mean, this has been, separated twins, we find they dress the same. They actually have the same occupations. If one smokes, so does the other. They
marry
have
a
their
spouse with the
hairstyle
same name, yeah.
And they've been separated for years and years and years. Do we see the same examples here? That it's a straightforward experiment. It's been done 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm. And that's, it was just, this was not, it was improper, right? They weren't acting unethically when they mixed up the kids. They
Well, we
made a terrible mistake that had severe implications.
We should have like 60 identical children and put them in different cultures around the world. We could put some in the Kalahari with hunter-gatherer people. We could put some in Silicon Valley with a wealthy tech billionaire. Put them in all kinds of different places and see how they how their nurture affects their nature.
Yeah,
Right.
we could clone them.
What-
Yeah,
So
clone
that they're
them.
all
There you
exactly
go.
the same age and everything else, and just spread them out. It'd be far better if we actually do it. Oh, yeah.
Mike is having some ethical.
Mike, this
qualms
is
here.
bothering him. I said you're supposed to feel uncomfortable a bit today, and that's okay for right now because it's thinking about it, right?
Oh, yeah. If you tried to run this by the board and actually try to run this experiment, you'd be thrown out of your
Yeah.
ear. No chance.
Yeah,
So
no.
you have to do it sub terra and off the books.
Those of us who studied any kind of social science in graduate school learned that to do any kind of experiment, even if it involved witless, unwitting subjects among the undergraduate population. You had to get
Well, now
all
you're
kinds.
repeating yourself.
Well, yeah. Had to get all kinds of approvals and had to go before a board of ethics and whatnot. Is
Well, yeah, I mean,
highly
some of the
controlled.
classic experiments that were done in the
60s and 50s,
were just terrible. What they did, they treated kids, people, undergraduates, as if they were criminals, and other ones
Right.
were the guards, and they saw what they occurred, and those would not be allowed anymore at all. They were
Yeah.
highly unethical. I think, actually, the guy, one of the experimenters' wife finally pulled the plug and said, "You can't be doing that," when
Yeah.
he came home and told stories about what he was doing, you know. But, so, yeah.
Did they
and
perform the experiment, given the situation, say, hey?
Is it unethical to question or to talk to these kids, given what happened 30 years ago when they were mistakenly,
Ask for their permission.
Can you measure them now? Yeah.
is it ethical to do that?
Ask their permission.
Yeah, probably is.
Given their permission, you could perform it. I
Right.
mean, it's straightforward.
Right. Actually, and they found, as far as I know, I'm sure that there's a wealth of experimentation that's been done that I am not privy to exactly what they found out about these kids, so I can't pass it all on to you. But they actually are very well adjusted. The four of them work well together. They have good relationships with each other. You know, they have all these different things. One is your actual identical twin, but you never knew until about 3 or 4 years ago. Is he more important to you than the one that is your,
You grew up with.
that you
yeah.
grew up with but have no biological relationship to? And they've all come to a level of fairly good, you know, it was probably challenging and traumatic and you know, a problem. But they feel like they're all brothers right now, for the most part, is what I understand, and they've come to a pretty good relationship with it all, too. But, I mean, that's just something that could happen. We're talking magic wand. We can take this a few more steps, too, if we choose.
Well, I have something on my list that's highly unethical.
Let me finish this part, and
Okay.
then we'll go with yours,
All right.
There's a lot of ideas and challenges, things that people really like to work with identical twins in many ways, right? So as you start working on things, given the fact that they're twins, you can't do certain things. They're both the same age or so on. You can't vary every variable that you'd like to look at. But what if they were identical twins, and they've done this with fraternal twins, where maybe they're born of a African-American father and a Caucasian mother, and then there's twins that come out, and because they're fraternal, maybe one looks a little bit more Caucasian and one looks a little bit more African-American. And there have been studies done seeing how they've fit into the world and what's gone on, and longitudinal studies to see success rates of kids that have so many similar things. But what if now the magic wand starts playing, and what if you could have twins that were identical? Because this fraternal difference means that they don't have the same genetic structure, right? So you're not learning certain things. But what if everything was the same about two children except for their skin color? They were identical twins, except one looked a little bit more Caucasian and one looked a little bit more, and they went to the same schools, they had the same parents, they had the same food, you know, they were on the same sports teams possibly, you know, but maybe one's a little bit more Asian looking and one's more Hispanic looking, or all the different possibilities of that too. You'd need a magic wand to make genetics be that similar, but skin color be different. But after living as much the same as possible for, 10 or 20 or 30 years, you get 30 or 40 pairs of these kids to stand on a stage and talk about their life and what's been going on and what has happened to them. It's pretty powerful stuff. It would be compelling to sit in the audience and hear someone the two kids telling about their lives that way. It's almost, and I'm going with Mike Albrow here, it's almost cruel, right, to hear this. It's cruel to think that they'd be, up there passing this on, but that's what happens nowadays, that people are in situations like that.
I don't think that's cruel because it's not an experiment, you're observing. What is cruel is to do an experiment, that is to deliberately separate them and so on.
Right.
That is unethical. But making observations is not, in my opinion, unethical.
Okay. It could be, I guess,
It would never get past the IRB. The Instructional Review Board would go, no way.
even to make observations?
Well, you have to actually set it up and find all these people, and that's the first experiment, and that's the one that the IRB is going to go, no.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is a magic wand experiment because you can't make people with the exact same genes and everything exactly the same, yet they have a different skin color.
You could use CRISPR to do that, probably.
Yeah, maybe.
Just saying.
I do have a problem with identical twins not being identical, though.
Yeah, but if the only difference were hair color or eye color or skin color, you could genetically
But then
modify
they're
one.
not identical.
Well, yeah, identical except for that
Identical,
one thing.
yeah, right. That's why you need a magic wand to do this, right?
And a hell of a lot of chemistry.
Yeah. But, I mean, there's an aspect of that when, if you would impose that on people somehow with CRISPR or whatever, maybe that's the part that you and I would both agree on is cruel, right? To impose that difference in themselves somehow, and then to observe what occurs and what goes on from all of that. What if you had identical twins because you have a magic wand and they're identical twins, no differences to them at all, but they're 25 years different in age? And you see how one goes through their life 25 years ago compared to one at a 25-year different time
You freeze
frame.
an embryo and defrost it 25 years from now.
Yeah, that's maybe not even, I mean, that's...
Doable.
Yeah, that's not undoable.
Yeah. Right.
It's a variable you haven't accounted for, Mike's saying, the the environment that they're in, but that's the environment you're testing for. And we test about the environment nowadays. We see, what's different about the environment now that's making kids be this way or that way? Why are more kids depressed, or why are all these things happening? You know, and so they look at that, and you could potentially do some experiments if you'd have exactly identical kids that were 25 years apart in age, right? Same genes, but different generations.
Genes would probably have changed by then. Probably have,
Holes in them,
yeah, holes in them.
need patches. So, what's that?
Clones, she's saying.
Yeah.
Instead of twins.
Send in the clones. All right, but you could, so there's a lot of other things. There's ways, well, let you have an opinion to bring up one of yours again, too.
Well, so CRISPR was on my list, you know, engineering humans to be what the perfect human would be. But the problem there that I foresee is who decides what perfect is. But still, in principle, we could use CRISPR once we've sorted out some of the things about intelligence and height and athletic ability and creativity and mental illness and homosexuality and on and on and on. We could engineer people. And that'd be kind of interesting. Well, yeah, Mike brings up the analogy with Nazis, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see you're disturbed. There's ethics in here involved, and there's no question about that at all. And I don't think it's bad to talk about and feel
Right, talk about the
uncomfortable
ethics.
about it.
Yeah.
But I meant to show this picture too. Identical twins reunited,
Oh, this is them, huh?
2017, right?
Yep. Two different sets.
Two pairs of identical twins, but not growing up with each other. Joanne, you had something you wanted to talk about CRISPR or something else?
I was just interested, there was a comment the other day. There are two baseball players out there right now in the major leagues who look, act, and everything else identical. And they're both have the same injuries. They both wear the same clothing. They both look and act as, and everyone goes, "You must be twins." Well, then they went through all the genetic testing, and no, they're not related at all.
Huh. They're
But-
doppelgangers.
But
huh?
there they are. They're total doppelgangers in not only their appearance, but their athleticness, the injuries that they've suffered,
Wow.
and all the other things. So, again, are we coming around to the point of the duplication of genes, which is, again has come up? The
Yeah.
doppelganger is a duplication of your genes, even though you're not related at all. But there are only so many genes and so many combinations, and we've used a lot of them. So, there's 8 billion of us, and yeah.
It's pretty hard to imagine that we've used up the
Yeah.
genetic code and we're going to be running out of possibilities. But there's a lot of similarities. People see me and they say, "You look so much like somebody I've known," and people do tend to see those types of things. I was going to finish up with one about controlling for diet and exercise, a magic wand experiment where maybe you divide the U.S. exactly in half, okay? And everybody in one part of the U.S. would stay the same, eating and dietary habits, no changes. And then you'd start, on the other side, you'd do the things that you'd choose to do, right? Maybe you can make all elevators not work, and you have to go up to, you can't take an elevator for 6 floors or less, right? And bouncy balls instead of chairs in all the offices and schools and everything else, right? Standing desks at work and in classrooms for people, right? Maybe if you want to buy something at the store, there's not as much available of junk food and different things at stores. Or maybe all the junk food is up on the 4th floor of the store and you got to
Yeah.
go up 4 flights to get to the junk food or something like that. And then you'd see, this could be a magic wand experiment, you'd see, maybe there'd be a 1/4 mile walk from wherever you park your car to your place of work, right? And so you can't just get out of your car and stroll into work. What do you think the results we'd get some results out of it, and there could be a lot of possibilities that we don't know. You may be very sure certain things are going to happen. What do you think would happen if we could actually do that in a magic wand experiment?
Well, the candy bar industry would suffer tremendously.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I think we have to make a clear distinction between experiment and observation, right? Because when you talk about experiment, you mean you're actually changing something to observe the result. Observation is using the data that exists. Now, in your latest example, for example, we have vast statistics. There must be many people living in 6-story buildings without an elevator, and others living with an elevator, and you can observe and study those. That's social science. That's fine. But experiment, you're actually going to force these people to go upstairs or force these people to... That is where the ethics comes in, and where it's not an experiment if you observe, right? So astronomers, when they look at the stars, and they're not doing experiments, they're doing observations, and they're making scientific conclusions. It is science, but it's not an experiment, okay? So when you're talking about this, what makes me uncomfortable, doing experiments, when you don't need to, because there's lots of statistics out there. If you use the whole population, you don't have to, anyway.
But we've had a lot of statistics over the years in which we know it would help people to walk up 3 flights of stairs.
Yeah.
We know it would help people if they'd park at the far end of the parking lot and walk a 1/4 mile to work. All these things are known, right? Kind of what I said earlier, experiments are sometimes made to kind of prove the thing or set up a standard in which what you are pretty sure of is proved out, and you can then take your thoughts and whether it's impose them or at least express them.
So this isn't
do
so
that.
much about the effect on an individual of exercising more and eating right. It would be, what's the effect on society, right? It's a much bigger scope of what would the healthcare system look like? What would governance look like? What would insurance policies look like if you had a vast population that lived healthy and then compared to a vast population that ate cake?
Right. I mean, I think it can have definitely a social, large-scale aspect to it, and someone could also determine to bore down on just a small group of people and get some results out of that as well, too, people that fit in with that.
Yeah, a lot of the things on my list, we don't have time to go through them, but involved essentially social experiments. What would it be if our culture decided to do X? You know, like really quick example, far more effort put into rehabilitation for offenders, criminals, rather than punishment and incarceration. What would our society look like? Let's just make it happen.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, and I think there's a whole variety of different results that we don't even know specifically about, let's say, the dietary and exercise one. I mean, it could be that everybody in the experimental group gets fed up with all this stuff, this hockey, horse hockey that they're told to do, and they all move to the place where they can get the food and they like it how it was, right? I mean, there is some implications that people don't want to put in the effort to get as completely fit as they could, so that's a possibility. It could be that maybe the experimental group gets so much significantly fitter and the others are jealous or mad or whatever too and don't appreciate it. Then, there could be all sorts of social ramifications from that as well too. It could be that maybe nobody hires the control group. They aren't as pleasant to have around as the fit group or
And
something
they have more
like that.
sick days.
Right, yeah, they're taking more sick days, and, I mean, there can be a whole plethora of results. I don't even know what the results would be if you would do it, but it's not, it's an interesting topic to think about in terms of the results that come in would have to be formulated, diagnosed, and results of that would then maybe lead to some other understandings or thoughts too.
Right.
Mike?
Well, I was just going to say these experiments are happening all the time on a big scale. I mean, think of communism in the 1910s. Think of the Cultural Revolution in China.
Right.
Think of what's happening now in Afghanistan. These are experiments on whole populations, and one observes what happens. But it takes decades and millions of people involved, I'm not
But
saying
you'd like to do an experiment on communism in half of China.
well, yeah, but
That's a magic wand again.
Okay.
I'm offending Mike's sensibilities toward the scientific method.
He's never going to come back to another in-person Science Sunday if we're not careful.
No, it's yeah, and I mean, that's the value potentially, because it can show you the limitations of what we're doing. People think that things are proven. They think they know the results and the answers to certain topics, but really, if you try to say, well, to really understand this, you'd have to apply the scientific method with a magic wand to this level. You really don't have full data to prove what you're really saying. Is communism better than what they had
Capitalism.
before than capitalism? People will take both sides of that argument, and you can potentially, with a magic wand, try to explain some of these things in ways that people have resisted doing nowadays.
Yeah, make a communist country that doesn't have oligarchs as leaders, et cetera.
Yeah. So, like I said, my plan was to make you a little bit uncomfortable about it all and to think about biracial identical twins and diet and exercise and so on, many different aspects of it. And it's interesting to think that there's possibilities that go on from there. You could apply it to how do you get people to take vaccines, what could you do with a vaccine experiment and so on too, and fluoridating water and so on too. But maybe that's for another Science Sunday. Any thoughts or ideas? Eric, do you have one? No? Joanne?
I tried to hand around the magic wand, and nobody wanted it.
Yeah, that's not the proper magic wand, apparently, that magic microphone.
I got real quick.
Yeah.
Couple. I'd like to dig up the city of Mexico and Jerusalem because archaeology is one of my interests, and these are some of the most ancient and artifact-rich cities in the world. Just bust everybody out of them and dig them up. Dig up the old temple in Jerusalem, and let's see what's there.
Oh, that'd be neat. That'd be neat.
I'd like to try an experiment where we have a meaningful wealth tax, right? So that generational wealth becomes less relevant in our cultures. See how that goes on the social science side.
Great Britain already did that.
Who did?
England, if you will, Great Britain. And of course, it destroyed all the wealthy families, and they lost their homes, they lost their property, and basically it impoverished the country.
Well, we could
But
try it
that's
here
why
too.
we have a lot of Scots over here, because we were all thrown out in favor of sheep.
I'm not in favor of impoverishing people, mind you. And in fact, one of the other issues on my list was let's try the universal basic income. Let's do some more experimentation with that, see how that goes. So,
Right, and that's been tried. Again, people are trying to moderate that. I think in St. Louis, they tried a small example of that, and in Chicago, they just started a little trial
Yeah.
thing of it. But you're saying, bring it all in and see
Yeah.
what happens, yeah.
yep.
Interesting. All right, thank you so much for participating. I appreciate that. I was looking for good discussion and conversation, and I think we did it, and so I'm happy with that.
Can you imagine what this would have been with 90 people?
A talk with 90 people?
Yeah,
with
that
this-
This, oh,
chaos.
5 of us was hilarious. It was great.
Yeah. Well, Mike, I hope we didn't make you too uncomfortable.
Sure, we did.
Just, through-
I mean, this issue of identical twins that are separated and come back and they have some common features among them. This would be a more interesting picture if the two identical twins in the middle were both wearing the same ties and they're not met before. They meet each other as adults
And
and they both got the same ties.
magically.
That would be interesting,
Yeah.
okay?
I'm sure they did a lot of things about their different aspects of them. I just don't know what they are.
Yeah, but you know the color, the way, the tie you choose to wear is probably not in your DNA. Okay.
Or maybe it is.
Well,
Right.
if it was, then the two identical twins would be wearing the same tie.
Well, there are cases where identical twins that have been separated in different families end up having the same preference for music and
yeah, now
clothing.
that is
and-
interesting.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's not interesting.
Yeah.
As long as you don't separate them forcibly to do the experiment.
Ah,
We wave our magic wand about concerns like that. Posh, posh.
Thrown out of the
pish
Unitarian
posh,
Church.
right.
All right, thank you so much for all at home. Hope that you had an interesting conversation. And if you have any ideas about what magic wand experiments you'd recommend doing, send them in and we'll talk about them next time on Science Sunday.
Thanks, everyone.